Hey, what is up? How's it going, Jason Osborne? So yeah, back at it once again here, the week after reviewing the fourth episode of Breaking Bad. Cancer Man back here to review Gray Matter. So yeah, what is up at Shell? So my goodness gracious, I rewatched this episode again, probably for the 30th time if we're being honest. And my goodness, I forgot just how much I love this episode right here. This is just such an unbelievable episode and really reminds me why I just absolutely love this first season of Breaking Bad so much. I mean, the two stories that are going here, the A story and the B story, with the A story obviously being Walter White continuing to deal with the fallout of now his family knowing about his stage 3A terminal cancer diagnosis. And we also see here in the B story Jesse Pinkman continuing his life, if you will, following his, for the moment, being falling out with his former meth cook partner and high school chemistry teacher Walter White that we saw at the end of the previous episode. And my goodness, this again, one of the main reasons why as I was rewatching this episode again, why I love this episode so much is that I really sort of get to pile on Jesse Pinkman some more. People kind of know my sort of beliefs and opinions about this character. And this episode here really, I think, is a very sort of overlooked and underrated, if you will, episode in respect to cultivating and telling the complete story of Jesse Pinkman. What is up at Richie MC? Why is Jesse Pinkman wearing a suit? That is a great question that I will absolutely get to in a minute here. How's it going, Reeds? How's it going, Anton? I'm doing great, man. Had a great week. Hope you're doing good yourself. Appreciate the support there at Jason Osborne. Reeds, I almost forgot he was applying for a job. Yeah, and I'm gonna get into that as I was talking about Reeds here, where this episode is so interesting. When I was rewatching it again, speaking only for myself, and people definitely know sort of where I stand on Jesse Pinkman, this episode really, at least maybe my sort of perspective is skewed a bit, but I really don't think Jesse Pinkman comes off very well in this episode. And of course, this is definitely probably a little bit biased just based on my opinions about his character, but he comes across as a very sort of selfish, in my opinion, very narcissistic, a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for here? Almost even a little bit entitled, if you will. And again, I know, it's a very complex, nuanced story that is the story of Jesse Pinkman, but, you know, me personally, my sort of beliefs here are more or less amplified and magnified. I guess that sort of means the same thing. But yeah, let's sort of get into why I feel that way in respect to Jesse Pinkman's character in the B story here in this unbelievable episode that I just rewatched for the probably 2 dozenth time today. But anyway, so what is up at Justin Cruz? So, wish we had more Better Call Saul at Travis Gray. Yeah, me too. I saw the news that Ray Seahorn and Vince Gilligan are teaming up for some sort of project that is more X Files than sort of Southwest drama. And it definitely appears that Vince Gilligan wants to pursue these other projects, but who knows? Maybe in a decade from now we'll get more of this universe. Who knows? But yeah, I wish there was more Better Call Saul as well. But that's why I love talking about Breaking Bad, because I love this show too. And yeah, Reese, Jesse rocking that Saul suit though. LOL. I love that. He's got the clip-on tie and all at Reed's. The full sort of 9 yards here in respect to trying to play the part here for this job interview. But yeah, so continuing with the fallout of the previous episode where Jesse goes to Walter White's house to proposition him, saying, that meth we cooked was unbelievable. I know guys who would give a certain body part for another taste of it. Want to be nice to the algorithm, if you will. But of course, he said if you could ever see yourself clear to cooking a little bit more, and of course, Walter White, after dealing with everything that they did over the course of the first 4 episodes, including that episode, said, wow, get off my property, go, and don't come back. Of course, Jesse Pinkman at the same time says, $4,000, your share, left body part at Francis Ray, that's right, your share of that batch we cooked, that's why I'm here. Hey, I didn't smoke it all, throws the money up in the air, and Walter White, of course, being in the state that he is in, of course, needed that money and took that money. But with that being sort of the preface here, of how Jesse Pinkman's story is continuing, we then see him in the cold opening scene here in a very unusual sort of. Am I not speaking to? You threw me off there at Reeds. You're quoting. I hope the sound quality is okay. I had a little bit of trouble in the previous stream. I had to restart it. I hope the stream the sound quality is okay. You threw me off there a little bit at Reeds using the Jesse Pinkman quote from the previous episode. But continuing here, following him, appearing to be no more with his former meth cook partner. We then see him at this job interview here where, again, there's definitely a misunderstanding where Jesse wants to be a part of this real estate sales team. Of course, the manager here is a little bit confused because this is more of a advertising job, as we see him open up the window and display to us that at the time, of course, we don't know that it's Badger, but we learn that this character is advertising, sort of being a sign spinner. But again, I don't want to get bogged down in the sort of every single specific detail here. This is a really important scene, in my opinion, for sort of painting the entire picture of Jesse Pinkman, and I want to really try to, paint with a much broader brush here than getting bogged down and just repeating what exactly happened here. But long story long, I'm going to try to do my best. Jesse Pinkman wants to be a salesman. He wants a sort of dignified job here. He wants to be a real estate salesman, it appears. I think this is a real estate agent. But of course, I think he fully is well aware that the job he is applying for is this sort of advertising job where he's going to be the sign spinner. And as the sort of manager here or the hiring agent here is basically saying, this is really a no experience necessary type job. And, when push comes to shove, and if I can find the right frame here, when Jesse really sort of sees, again, let me try to find the perfect frame here. It's going to be hard to find these exact frames. But when Jesse Pinkman more or less sees, this man spinning the sign and this sort of undignified job, he very sort of quickly gives up on this sort of, dream, if you will, of working a sort of dignified job. And it's kind of really interesting here where did the rapper Coolio pass away? I wasn't too familiar with his work. He's a little bit before my time. I think I saw him on an episode of Hot Ones, if that's the case. But wow, quite the breaking news here for sure. In respect to that. So thank you very much, chat. But sort of getting back into the story of Jesse Pinkman here, when Jesse basically he wants to work this sort of dignified sort of job, and I think he thinks, he definitely has an ego, I think a lot of people tend to, but Jesse Pinkman's ego and sort of self-worth here won't allow him to sort of do this undignified job where he stands in this dollar bill suit waving this sign as his partner Brandon Mayhew is doing as well. He wants a sort of more dignified profession, or at least something that maybe would pay better. It's how do you put this? It's almost a sort of, the piece de resistance is that the job is undignified, according to Jesse Pinkman, and it doesn't pay very well. And of course, the grand irony here is that he quickly sees that the person working this job that he didn't want to work was none other than his friend, Badger, Brandon Mayhew. And so yeah, it's kind of interesting here where they get to reminisce excuse me, actually, I have sorry about that. The temperature here was getting horrible, so had to step away for a second. Had to cool it down a little bit here. It was on fire in here. But anyway, so yeah, sort of trying to get back into it. Kind of was distracted there a little bit by the temperature. But yeah, this scene here, again, I don't want to get sort of bogged down in every sort of single sort of specific detail here. But at Charlie Hennings, Jesse really did try to go straight. He was a good person who lost. who was lost. The pull to the other side is real. Totally loved his character. Yeah, again, it's sort of an interesting scene here where he wanted to sort of, go straight. He really did at Charlie Hennings, but he definitely doesn't seem like a character who wanted to sort of work these menial, sort of non-glamorous, I hate to use the term undignified because, any sort of job is not dignified. There's a sort of real, sort of noble, just, what's the word? There's just sort of a noble aspect of sort of a hard day's work and truly, pulling oneself up by their own bootstraps and being sort of, financially, independent and working a sort of straight, honest day's work. But of course, Jesse Pinkman here did not want to work this type of job. And in full honesty, as the sort of manager was saying to him, Jesse Pinkman really doesn't have any marketable skills to sort of work a dignified job. And it is a little bit of maybe sort of, maybe it's sort of narcissism, maybe it's a little bit of his ego, or maybe it's just truly ignorance to truly believing that he could just walk into this sort of, real estate office and think that they'll just hire him off of the streets. Not being licensed, not being bonded, not having any work experience, not having a college degree. I mean, they don't need a college degree, but it helps. To really sort of think, hey, I'm hint, 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 I was a really good meth salesman, so I'm pretty sure I'd be a good real estate salesman too. I mean, it was just, again, I feel like Jesse Pinkman comes across a little bit here, a little bit narcissistic here. But again, best case scenario with Jesse Pinkman, we can all just chalk it up to just ignorance and naivete of just being this sort of youthful, naive sort of person. And, sort of depending on your perspective here. So I feel like at best case scenario, I would say Jesse Pinkman was ignorant to just, his true situation. What is up, Just Dan? And at worst, I feel like he was a little bit entitled, a little bit narcissistic, a little bit egotistical, if we're being completely honest. But, yeah, just sort of an interesting scene here. And again, my goodness gracious, I mean, say what you will about Badger, but Brandon Mayhew, he did not have this sort of, self-aggrandizing ego. Again, it comes across that way, at least in my opinion, for Jesse Pinkman, where, yes, he was on probation, as he said. He needed to have a sort of gainful employment, and he likely did not have the sort of very marketable skills where he could get this sort of, more dignified job. And this was really sort of all that was available to Brandon Badger Mayhew. And unlike Jesse Pinkman, he did this undignified work, at least in Jesse Pinkman's mind. I hate using that word. Again, Badger's not the most, completely sort of, maybe his priorities are a little bit messed up. You probably shouldn't be using this substance here when I believe you are drug tested when you were on probation. That definitely seems to be the case. I mean, I think it depends on what you're on probation for. I remember going back to Better Call Saul, I believe in the episode entitled Quite a Ride, when we see Saul Goodman at his PPD. And again, we also see this during the Something Stupid montage scene. There definitely is a sort of line for drug test, and I don't think that Saul, Jimmy McGill, had to submit to drug tests because what he was doing his pre-prosecution diversion for didn't have anything to do with drug use. Again, don't quote me on any of this. I'm not an expert in any of this. But yeah, just sort of very interesting to sort of juxtapose, just the character Badger and the character Jesse Pinkman here in this very first scene of this episode. And yeah, it is, and again, it's kind of interesting here. This really really plants the seeds of where this storyline is going to go over the course of this episode, and where Jesse Pinkman's saying he's thinking about retiring from the meth game, but of course Badger's saying no, you can't do that. Can't be hearing that. Also, sort of propositioning him, saying he can hook him up with some mad pseudoephedrine because of course that substance is needed to manufacture the type of methamphetamine, the pseudo-coke that Jesse Pinkman and Walter White are currently using at this point in time. But of course, as we know, he has to go meet, again, we don't learn this until the next episode. I mean, maybe if you're more well-versed in the sort of this sort of line of work, that I think there's absolutely a limit on the amount of pseudoephedrine that you can buy at one time because, of course, people use this to create methamphetamine. And so, but of course, Badger has some sort of connection where he's able to acquire all of the pseudoephedrine. And again, he propositions Jesse saying we could team up, no pressure, no pressure. And again, real sort of very telling scene here. What is up at Taco Truck Engineer, Stoned Yoda? What is up, Helicopter? Absolutely. But yeah, this sort of, this final scene here where we see Jesse Pinkman in this car here, sort of looking over the sort of job classified section, the sort of the job section of the newspaper, really sort of, looking at the fact that his job prospects really don't exist, looking over and looking at his friend Badger doing this sort of work that he doesn't want to do. And, Jesse Pinkman, I mean, you can sort of say, well, he had no choice here. I mean, he had to go and cook meth. There's nothing else he could do. It's like, no, that's incorrect. Despite everything that's happened here, despite the fact that, two people had died, his former partner, Emilio, his cousin, Crazy 8, had died. They had dealt with this just unbelievable sort of fallout where they had to sort of decompose their bodies to cover up their crimes. They've done all these terrible things, all this post-traumatic stress. I mean, Jesse Pinkman, I mean, there's no way he can't know the sort of, all of the consequences of everything that he's doing. But despite all of that, it's basically either continue down that road or work a job like Badger's working right here. And, we all know the decision he makes because Jesse Pinkman just feels maybe above this. And again, trying to go back to that comment here, at Charlie Hennings, he tried to go straight, but he didn't try very hard as far as I'm concerned. And, it's sort of the grand irony here where, again, we don't really know how many job interviews Jesse went to. In my sort of opinion, it almost seems as though this is the very first one he went to, and it was sort of so excruciatingly terrible. This job interview, he almost felt like giving up on this entire process completely and decides to go in to, partner up with his friend Badger to manufacture amphetamines. But, he tried, at Charlie Hennings, but in my opinion, he didn't try very hard. And, he could have tried harder. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who know the story of Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, who I think was rejected hundreds and hundreds of times for his funding for this company that he wanted to start, Starbucks. And again, I mean, just imagine the sort of mental sort of, fatigue of just getting rejected again and again. No one likes getting rejected. It's a terrible feeling. No one likes it, and people try to avoid it in their life. And I'm sure this did not feel good for Jesse Pinkman whatsoever, this sort of rejection and this sort of realization of if he wants to go on the straight and narrow, what type of work he has to do. But, I mean, at the end of the day, he could have done it. He absolutely could have done it. He could have worked this job like Badger was working, but he decided, no, I'm Jesse Pinkman. I don't know what was going on in his head. I can imagine what was going on in his head. Maybe I'm too good for this. But just a very sort of interesting, sort of very telling scene here of this character Jesse Pinkman, where at best case scenario, in my opinion, you can say he's ignorant. I think. I mean, ignorance is probably his best argument here, and that's really not saying much. But again, that's just my opinion. Maybe I'm a little bit biased. I'm not the biggest fan of Jesse Pinkman, as we all know. But yeah, just sort of rewatching this episode again, a lot of sort of thoughts coming into my head about this character, so... Justin Cruz, Jesse should have been out when he had $5 million, but decided not to, but he was able to get out. Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of like the paths that sort of never crossed there. Sort of every opportunity where Jesse, I mean, it wasn't meant to be. It really wasn't meant to be Justin Cruz. I mean, I don't want to sort of get too ahead of myself here at Justin Cruz, in regards to the story, but yeah, I don't know. He had so many opportunities to get out. And so, again, I don't want to jump ahead of myself here, but I even think about, I've talked about this in the past where, Jesse Pinkman, he has this sort of weird, almost sort of, I don't want to say twisted, but sort of very sort of peculiar sort of version of justice that he has in his head, where once he found out about the rice and cigarette that was lifted from his pocket, he needed to go back to Saul's office and attempt to burn down Walter White's house. And in a sort of linear trajectory after all of that, Andrea ends up dying, the mother of the son that he is trying to avenge here in this quasi sort of vigilante justice. But the grand irony in all of that is if he just went in that car and went with Ed the Disappearer, all of that sort of death and destruction could have been avoided. And you could have said, yes, well, Jack Walker and his crew and Todd and Walt, and Lydia, they all needed their comeuppance. They all needed to sort of, meet their demise because they're not good people. But the grand irony in all of that is that Andrea was the collateral damage there of that decision that Jesse Pinkman made. Very, very ironically, where he wanted to sort of avenge Brock, but in doing so, his actions accidentally killed his mother. And Brock really, he didn't know about any of those. He didn't know about Jack Walker. I mean, he knew about Walt. Obviously, that story was never told to us in respect to how he was actually poisoned. But it's sort of what he didn't know wouldn't have hurt him. So yeah, it's sort of at Justin Cruz. Yeah, I mean, Jesse Pinkman, he just sort of, the bad luck in terms of decision making, just again and again and again, always, seeming to make the wrong decisions. And it really just, everything just ends up just biting him in the where. So, YouTube not liking it when I use foul language, I've noticed. But yeah, it's so much food for thought here. Absolutely. Yeah, at Stone Yoda, absolutely. And again, Stone Yoda, you mentioned that scene from El Camino where Walt tells him to get his business degree, and this is the sort of the thing. I mean, I don't want to pile on Jesse here because I feel like all people are kind of lazy and they don't really want to sort of, put in the work to acquire these sort of, things that will make their life better. Where, I mean, he could get a business degree, I suppose. I mean, it's definitely possible. I suppose he could enroll in like a community college or something like that. It would absolutely be possible, but it would take a lot of work and a lot of sort of, actions that Jesse really isn't, willing to undertake. And he sort of has this sort of very tantalizing siren song that is the manufacturing and distribution of methamphetamine, which he's always drawn to because, I won't say it's easy, but Jesse, he sort of already knows it. He already sort of has this sort of very, quasi skill, if you will, and it pays very well. And so he always just sort of goes back to it's the sort of easier route for Jesse. Everyone kind of wants to take the sort of easy route, if you will. It's sort of just I feel like it's sort of an intrinsic nature in the human desire to sort of just achieve as much as possible while exerting the minimum of effort. It's sort of true. If something was easy, everyone would do it. And again, I don't want to pile on Jesse here because I feel like he's not the only person who sort of takes these shortcuts and, really is, for whatever reason, doesn't want to sort of put in the work when, I guess he could, but yeah, it would be very, very difficult. I mean, at this point in time, he probably has, very little money to his name. He does have a home, which is something. He has sort of, he has residentiary privileges, but again, I don't know if, again, it's very confusing in respect to whether or not he could have sold the house and he could have sort of acquired, the money from that house and he could have moved somewhere completely, just moved away, started his life, done some, again, as we've learned over the course of this series, he had these sort of interests in woodworking and sort of other sort of, working with your hands jobs. I feel like he had he if he really put his mind to any of this, I really feel like he could have started over and not went down this very bad path. But again, I have no idea what's going on in Jesse Pinkman's mind whatsoever. None of us do. We don't know his thought process. We only can sort of surmise for ourselves. But yeah, at the end of the day, he sort of took the easy route of continuing to do this manufacturing and distribution of methamphetamine. And like I said, best case scenario, he was just kind of naive to the fact that there's other things he could have done with his life. And yes, he learns eventually, but not until after a lot of people sort of suffer and die. When you just think about, as he kind of says to Walter White, everything I touch is ruined, turn to S. Andrea's going to meet her demise. Jane is going to meet her demise. Brock is going to be, lose a mother and go through all this turmoil. Donald Margolis, Tomas, all of the collateral damage that Jesse Pinkman sort of has his fingerprints on. And yes, you could argue that maybe these things would happen to these characters anyway. I mean, debatable with Andrea and Brock. I mean, it's possible just based on the sort of the nature of all those characters. But yeah, it's a lot of sort of food for thought here, and there's no right answer to any of this. Again, these are just my opinions, and no one knows what's going on in Jesse Pinkman's head, and you could watch this scene and have an entirely different point of view or analysis of all of this. But yeah, it's quite the story here for sure. Charlie Hennings never looked at it that way. So true how the decisions we make dictate our future. He did have many opportunities to get out, so I see ego being the burden. He did have a good heart, though. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, I don't think he was a sort of sociopath or a psychopath or anything like that. I think he definitely had sort of, a good heart in air quotes. I mean, I see what you're getting at there. But yeah, definitely a lot of pride and ego. And again, the grand irony in all of this is that the story of sort of Jesse's pride and Jesse's ego is absolutely intertwined in this episode with the A story of what's happening with Walter White, which of course absolutely deals with Walter White's ego as well. So yeah, quite great episode. I forgot how much I love this episode. My goodness. Yeah, Richie MC, it's a sort of long sort of story there. We don't know the full story of Jesse Pinkman and his family. We can only speculate. I tried to get at that a little bit in the previous review of episode 4, where, we don't know the full story of Jesse Pinkman. I talked about that a little bit more in the previous stream about where seemingly he and his brother Jake had the exact same opportunities, but just went on completely different paths. Maybe a lot of that was sort of just the nature. Maybe Jake was just a more sort of intelligent, a person who naturally gravitated and was more well suited to exceed in the sort of the traditional opportunities that he was given from an academic point of view. He was sort of just, the gold standard of academic achievement, if you will. And it's very easy to succeed in life, I feel, if you are good at sort of that sort of skill set. But when you're a character like Jesse Pinkman, when you're not good at that skill set, maybe it's much more difficult. And again, we don't know the sort of child rearing that was done to Jesse versus Jake with his parents. We could only speculate. So I don't know. We could only speculate on all of that. So. But yeah, so continuing here, I'm just trying to decide if I'm going to watch. There's basically two paths I can sort of take when talking about this episode. I can basically just talk about the entire Jesse story and then the entire Walt story. I think I may do that, actually. I think I sort of may talk about the Jesse Pinkman, because truly, these are two completely separate stories that are going on in this episode that finally cross up and meet at the very end. And so, yeah, I think I'm actually going to do that. I think I'm going to start with the B story here, and I'm going to sort of, talk about sort of Jesse's actions here over the course of this episode, and then I'm going to sort of get to Walter White after this. But yeah, so sort of to skip ahead here, where, following Jesse making this decision where he's going to team up with Brandon, we then see this unbelievable scene here where Brandon decides to team up with Jesse. And yeah, just absolutely hilarious scene here, and sort of really sort of highlights and exemplifies the that Justin Cruz should rather I go sequentially. I'm kind of curious. Would people rather I just go sequentially in this episode, or would you rather I talk about the entire Jesse story and then the Walt story and how they meet up? I'm kind of curious. Do people care? People have any opinion at all? But yeah, I could just talk about the entire episode. I guess I could talk about it sequentially too, because that's sort of the way it was intended. And I guess there was a sort of intention by the way it was presented in this episode. I could sort of do that if people want that instead. But yeah, I guess I could try that instead. So at Justin Cruz, I see you tuning into a lot of these streams. So yeah, sequentially, yeah, okay, I can definitely do that. I can talk about the episode as is. So okay, yeah, I can definitely do that. So. But yeah, continuing here. So following this, we then, following the cold opening scene, which we will see progress over the course of this episode, we then get to the A story here, where we see Walter White and Jesse Pinkman going to this birthday party. And, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, we now know the entire story of Gretchen and Elliot and Gray Matter and Walter White's involvement in all of this, and how he felt like he was totally screwed and cheated out of what was rightfully his. But, of course, at this point in time, we don't know the whole story, because, truthfully, the whole story has not been cultivated and crafted here. So, but anyway, yeah, really great scene here, this entire sort of birthday scene. It really sort of, again, really trying not to get bogged down in every single little specific piece of detail here, but, the grand big picture here, like I said, really sort of cultivating and developing the backstory of Walter White and the Gray Matter story that will be very consequential to this overall story of Breaking Bad. For goodness sake, it will even factor into the series finale of this show in the episode entitled Felina, where Gretchen and Elliot will also make their return. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this episode, and of course Gretchen and Elliot appear in the penultimate Granite State, but I don't think Elliot appears until Granite State after this episode. So it is kind of crazy how this character, Elliot Schwartz, who appears in this episode and does not appear again until the penultimate episode of the series, at the same time has such a important, consequential impact on this story. It is quite crazy to think about in the grand scheme of things. Ooh, but yeah, again, a lot to go over here, and kind of a very sort of interesting decision here by the creators, and a very intentional decision. I remember I always sort of wondered the decision, and I was always thinking of just why, Walt and Skylar wore these very blue sort of outfits here when clearly there was some sort of beige theme for this party, as Walt and Skylar even say themselves. I guess we missed the beige theme. And to this day, I always wondered why this was done and the sort of symbolism behind the decision for them to be dressing like this. But again, there's sort of, two sort of, again, I feel like there's definitely a lot of potential theories and thoughts here. But the sort of one theory that sort of came to mind was just that, Walt just, really doesn't fit in anywhere. It just sort of displays to us the sort of fact that Walt is, again, he doesn't really fit in this world. That's sort of the way that I see the sort of one symbolic purpose of these outfits in this beige party here. And number two was, I think it's a sort of very subtle, maybe not so subtle, a foreshadowing of the fact that Walt is not going to take Elliot's offer here, and sort of really foreshadows the fact that Walt is going to go down this sort of methamphetamine manufacturing and distribution path. It almost sort of in hindsight maybe foreshadows the blue meth that comes later in this, at the end of this season. Maybe that's a stretch here, and I was actually kind of looking at the Breaking Bad color wheel here a little bit too. At J Ladybug, I was kind of getting into that, and sort of, the color of blue, it symbolizes, even like, it symbolizes chemistry, and so sort of the magic of methamphetamine, and even the sort of methamphetamine, that's sort of the color here. At J Ladybug, a standout blue product hits the scene in the desert of normalcy. Yeah, again, I really feel like it sort of foreshadows the fact that Walt doesn't fit in, and he's not going to go about this sort of offer that Elliot offered him, and at the same time, sort of foreshadowing the blue meth that will come later in this season. So that's just sort of my opinion here in respect to the sort of symbolism and thematic nature of this. And to tell you the truth, I'm not the best at the sort of the theme, the sort of cultivating and crafting the sort of the symbolism and the thematic nature of the colors and everything like this. I feel like it's pretty subtle, but I hope I tried my best here in respect to the sort of explaining away the symbolism here of the sort of outfits that we see in the scene that are completely contrasted from the beige that everyone else is wearing. And again, sort of making Walt stand out. I mean, off the top of my head, it's sort of just, it's sort of coming to me as I'm even thinking about it, how, the rest of the characters, they're sort of all the same, if you will. It's sort of the same sort of, the color. Like, yes, while these people are successful and, maybe have the appearance of happiness, maybe the sort of theme here or the symbolism is that there's really no color in any of these people's lives. It's very sort of, the color is muted, it's drained, and it's not true sort of vibrance, if you will. Again, I feel like there's a lot of sort of symbolism and theme here, and I'm not sure if any of it is right or wrong, but I'm just sort of, it's always something I've wondered about, and it's really sort of always stood out to me, this scene here of these, the suits that, the blue sort of suit that Walt is wearing and the blue dress that Skylar's wearing here in this scene. At Richie MC, LOL. Yeah, I do not think you are reaching there, so. But yeah, again, like I talked about, I don't want to get bogged down in every little detail. The grand premise of this scene is that that strange waffle. That is funny, man. That is funny right there. But again, the grand premise of this scene is to basically set up a little bit of Walter White's past here. Great scene when he's speaking with Farley, an old colleague of his from Caltech. And again, there's so many sort of thematic sort of symbolism. There's so much thematic symbolism written here into this scene here. I mean, I feel like I could just go on and on and on. Again, I don't know if it's sort of that's interesting, Justin Cruz. I don't know if it's sort of jealousy here per se, but it's almost like Walt is sort of angry at himself for just allowing for all of this to happen. in respect to, again, it's very nuanced, but I really feel like Walt is sort of, and he even sort of says it at the end of this episode during the talking pillow scene, where I really feel like he's sort of upset with himself for being so complacent and just allowing himself to just be kind of walked on and basically just, taken for in respect to all of the work that he put in for this company, where he didn't really get to reap the reward or benefit of any of this. And a lot of it had to do with maybe his very sort of meek personality, where, as he said in the episode entitled Buyout, he took that $5,000 buyout, the sort of personality that he had in this, at this point in time in his life. But yeah, at Justin Cruz, again, it's not, it wasn't even really about the money per se, because that's a really good point, because we have to remember that at the end of this scene here, where Elliot offers him this job, where, again, it would pay very well, and of course, it wouldn't be the same as the sort of, multi-billion-dollar company that Elliot was likely maybe the primary shareholder for. So he likely has hundreds of millions of dollars, just based on the fact that the company is worth $2 billion. He's very, very wealthy. But again, it's not just about the money. It's also just about the pride and being the man, if you will. It's not just about the money for Walter White. That's a component of it for sure, but it's more just about, again, how do you even put this? It's more just about having pride in what someone is doing with their life. And again, it was more like, as he said in Felina, I did it for me. I was good at it. I was alive. It was more just about his pride. And yes, at Charlie Hennings, his ego of just, and he even said this to Jesse Pinkman, I believe, in the episode entitled Say My Name, where he said, we are the best at something. We are the best meth cooks in America. I mean, it's maybe not the sort of the thing to be proud of, but it was more just about Walter White's pride. And again, there's so much nuance here, but he wanted to just have this sort of value and self-worth in himself, where he just knew that he was the best at something. And he definitely cultivated and developed a lot of pride from creating this methamphetamine. But yeah, at Justin Cruz, I mean, you say he could have take their money for cancer treatment, but he didn't want their help. He wanted to help himself. Yeah, I mean, of course, at the same time, I mean, I feel like at a point in his life, I mean, maybe if his personality was situated better, he could have, run this company with Elliot and been the front man of it, and not accepted the buyouts, and maybe had a lot of pride and self-worth from the creation of this company. And that would have given him sort of a lot of pride and reason for being. But yeah, it's pretty nuanced here for sure. And again, there's so many little sort of details here in this scene. I mean, just we see the sort of the meek personality of Walter White being displayed here. We see the sort of cool flashback to, the sort of the ramen story that Elliot tells as well. And of course, the big sort of money shot scene here is this scene that happens with Gretchen and Walt here when they're reminiscing about old times. Yeah, at Justin Cruz. Yeah, it was more about, yeah, that's more of the put it. He wanted to be the man. It's kind of like, again, it's the sort of the little pieces all coming out. It reminds me of that speech that Mike gave in Say My Name. It's like, your pride and your ego, you just wanted to be the man. That has a lot to do with it for sure. But yeah, the sort of great scene here, absolutely. This sort of the Deus Ex Machina that happens here, the unsolvable problem is finally solved, where as it was, cultivated and crafted over the course of these first few episodes, we learned that this man here, Walter White, has a terminal lung cancer, stage 3A. The treatment will effectively bankrupt him and his family. It's going to cost him the hundreds of thousands of dollars. He doesn't have anywhere near that money. And at the same time, he hasn't really done anything with his life, and this is just all compounding in his decision making. But of course, we see right here that Walter White is given this just unbelievable olive branch, fig leaf, as he says, where Elliot essentially, or outright says to, and offers to pay for his entire treatment here, his entire chemotherapy. That is a great point there at Stone Yoda. And again, this scene here, I just, this scene here really made me think here. At Just Dan, you're clearly a mind reader because you know where I'm about to go here. But I definitely did think about that. Where, and again, it goes to what I was talking about a little bit earlier in respect to Walt's pride and Walt's ego, where Walt absolutely could have saved face here. Where after everything that happened with the two people that he killed, with all the sort of death and destruction that he enacted in his life, he could really sort of get a mulligan on all of that and say, you know what? Nobody will know about that ever. Me and Jesse, no one, we will say nothing to nobody. I can be totally saved here, essentially. At least we can, there can be an attempt to save my life here, because if I don't take chemo, the cancer will effectively kill me in a very short interval of time. I mean, even if he manages to live a year or two, I mean, the cancer will be the cause of his death. But again, I can take this sort of chemotherapy here, and while the odds are not very good that I live, even 5 years or more, there's at least a fragment of hope here, and it can absolutely be done on sort of, someone else's dime, if you will. And in the grand scheme of things, I can sort of twist this in my head where, yes, I do sort of deserve this money. I did sort of really contribute to this company, as even, Gretchen says at the end of this episode, that money is effectively yours anyway. And it's actually kind of weird. I was sort of thinking back to the fact where, yes, at the time, Walt took a buyout for $5,000 when the company was in its absolute infancy, and maybe that's what it was worth at the time. But, of course, when the company, after that, of course, in hindsight, it was a really sort of bad mistake. I mean, to sort of use an analogy here, I mean, it's probably not the best analogy with the way the economy is going, but if you sell your stock at $10, and then a couple years later it goes up to $1,000, it's not like, oh, you're entitled to that money because we feel sorry for you, et cetera, et cetera. You decided to take that buyout at the price that you did. But of course, so maybe that's what sort of Walt is sort of getting at here, where maybe, yes, I'm technically entitled to this, if you will, but at the same time, it really comes across as undeserved and sort of and pity and charity in the same respect where, like I said about, selling something too soon in the value of anything, whether it be a stock or something, of, some sort of collectible or something like that, where, of course, Walter White's pride and his ego will not allow him to accept Elliot's charity here. And yes, it is kind of crazy at Just Dan, where it is absolutely true, where he could have, this could have been the end of the story, where, oh my goodness, as he said to Jesse Pinkman, after we finish cleaning up this mess, our paths will never cross. We will tell this to no one. We will effectively move on with our lives. And he could have he absolutely was given that opportunity right here in this scene. But of course, as we all know, his pride and his ego would not allow him to do so. And this sort of need and desire to sort of have validation and to sort of just have a sort of purpose and reason for being in his life, and this weird desire to be the best at something. It is kind of, it is true. I mean, just this desire to just be the best at something, and giving Walt sort of pride and self-worth prevented all of that. Damn the consequences in hindsight when you think about the fact that his entire family will be destroyed, his brother-in-law will be destroyed, all the sort of collateral damage of everything that he's going to do for his own pride and ego. Where at the same time, I mean, say what you will about people who use his product and how they're sort of consenting adults, but, it's not a sort of good product and really affects, people. And, there's a lot of collateral damage as well when you think about even the child that a Spooge and his lady had, and how they were using Walt's product, and their sort of redhead son was being absolutely impacted by that. Again, that's a whole nother story. And it's true, they probably would be using sort of that product, and that kid would be suffering, irrespective of Walt manufacturing this product. But yeah, just there's so many sort of different angles here in this story that's happening. And of course, he tells Skylar this entire thing where, he rejects Elliot's overtures to pay for his treatment. And of course, at the time, we don't know the entire story. We're still sort of learning and trying to figure out what is going on in Walter White's head. But yeah, quite the setup scene here for sure. Just a great scene in hindsight where, despite the sort of, the answer basically falling from the sky and being, dropped into his lap, his pride and his ego will not allow him to take this sort of, this miracle that essentially, in air quotes, that has, fallen into his lap that could essentially save all of his, fix all of his problems. But of course, that will come, his sort of entire rationale and thought process will absolutely come into play later in this episode. Yeah, at J Ladybug, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I know exactly what you're talking about. That scene and I believe in season 2 of Breaking Bad, the episode entitled Peekaboo, the sort of B story that's happening when he meets with Gretchen, and we learn the entire backstory there when Jesse's dealing with Spooge and the lady. So yeah, I will definitely. I don't want to get ahead of myself too much here because, of course, like I said, at this point in time, of course, we know the entire backstory, but the entire backstory of Gray Matter had not been cultivated and crafted at this point in time in season 1. At Henry Lemoyne, thank you so much for the super chat, man. Really appreciate the support. Imagine if Jimmy helped Walt out with his company and helped him get his credit, like he said in the finale of Better Call Saul. Yes, absolutely. Really dig the profile picture there. I think that's John Lennon. I hope I pronounced your name right. Thank you again so much for the support. And yeah, that was a really great scene there that happened in Saul Gone, where they talk about regret and where essentially Walt says to him that he would redo what happened with a Gray Matter and the amount of money that would be entitled to him. And it actually is kind of funny how, again, I don't want to get sort of bogged down in the entire Gray Matter story because it doesn't sort of factor into again, we don't even actually know the entire Gray Matter story at this point in time in the yes, Ed Stone, you'd be the last lawyer that I'd ever reach out to. But yeah, it's a really great point where it is kind of interesting where that really wasn't even on his mind at Henry Lemoyne during his entire sort of venture with Saul Goodman. And it's actually kind of funny. Excuse me. I was actually kind of, this is quite the sort of parallel here, but I was kind of thinking about, it's sort of the, trying to, I guess you could sue, Elliot and Gretchen and I don't know, maybe civil court for saying that he was entitled to some of or a lot of the profits that Gray Matter made, and maybe he could win, or maybe there would be some sort of settlement there. That's a really sort of great point that you raise. But yeah, I was kind of thinking, but again, at the same time, you wonder. I mean, maybe Gretchen and Elliot could sort of win the case, and he wouldn't be entitled to anything because he sort of agreed to sell his shares of the company at a certain point. When all is said and done. I don't know if he would actually be entitled. Again, we don't know the entire story either. There'd have to be a lot of sort of discovery and a lot of documents coming out, and the sort of the background surrounding the sort of $5,000 buyout that he talks about in season 5 of Breaking Bad in the episode entitled Buyout. But yeah, you wonder if some sort of settlement would happen. But yeah, it's a really sort of great point in that scene. But yeah, it's funny. It never sort of came up, and how Saul even said, you should have told me this. We could have done something with this. I absolutely could have, there could have been some sort of slap suit or something to that. I mean, maybe that's not the right term there, but he definitely could have sued. And again, maybe they would have settled in order to sort of, they don't want to sort of drag Gray Matter's good name through the mud. But yeah, that would, it is sort of the, it kind of goes back to the grand sort of, premise of it all that Justin Cruz was talking a little bit about at Henry Lemoyne, where it wasn't just about the money for Walt. It wasn't just about sort of being financially compensated for his work. It was more, again, it's not just about the money for Walter White. It's truly about the journey and the experience and having sort of pride and self-worth in what someone is doing with one's life. Even if it's, even if it happens to be, something that, society, says is illegal or doesn't even value. And again, this is going to be quite a pull here, so try to stay with me if you will. But I even sort of think about the fact that there are a lot of people in this society who have a skill that, maybe society doesn't value as that great, in air quotes, monetarily speaking or otherwise. I think of sort of these sort of, obscure skills that people have, and maybe that they're sort of very, very high in their sort of profession or even the sort of skill that they have. And again, it's not about the money per se for these people. I feel like you can get a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment in life by just doing something and achieving something, no matter how small it is. But if you value it and you have pride and just self-worth and value in what you're doing with your life, it's going to make you much more fulfilled than just someone writing you a check for money, where Walt maybe even feels like he doesn't even really deserve. It would almost come across as charity to him, and he wouldn't be able to sort of experience all of the pride and fulfillment that he, got to sort of feel when he, created this methamphetamine empire. So yeah, it's quite the a lot of sort of things that I've sort of thought about in respect to this story, where it's not just about the money. It's really not. And I know maybe from afar people might sort of maybe think it's about money, but again, that's sort of just the sort of, I feel like it's sort of a secondary nature of all of this. Where again, it's kind of a cliche, but money, they say money alone will not sort of, fulfill you and make you have happiness, if you will. Again, I could totally be butchering this analogy that I'm about to say right now, so please quote me if I'm wrong. I mean, I really feel like I should probably double check my sources here, but I think I sort of know the story here. But if I'm not mistaken, didn't the sort of person who created Minecraft sell his sort of game to Microsoft for like billions and billions of dollars, but after he sold it, he sort of found himself sort of unfulfilled and suffering with, depression, because, it's not about the money, it's about sort of having a purpose and reason for being. And again, I mean, the Minecraft thing, maybe I'm totally wrong about that, but even I kind of go to sort of the movie There Will Be Blood, a great film, and I think about how the main character Daniel Plainview always wanted this, money and this wealth, and to have this sort of big house that he could build and be far away from everyone and have enough money to sort of insulate him from society, which he despised. As he said, he saw the worst in people. He would look at people and see nothing that he, saw worth liking. And of course, when he finally does, have all the money in the world after he strikes that deal with, was it Union Oil to build the pipeline? He's in his house, but again, there's no fulfillment. He's just, drinking himself to death and sleeping and shooting his possessions. So, yeah, I hope that's a long, sort of winded story where I'm trying to say it's not just about the money for Walt, and money alone would not, especially at this point in his life, would not buy him any amount of happiness, because even if he got this money from Elliot, as he talks about a little bit during the Talking Pillows scene, he's basically just using that money to spend on his own chemotherapy, which will essentially incapacitate him, where he's just marking time and having no fulfillment. So maybe at some earlier in his life, had he sort of had this realization of, realizing he hadn't done anything with his life prior to his cancer diagnosis, maybe that money would have, helped him in his life and given him some more satisfaction. But at this point in his life, following this cancer diagnosis, money alone was not going to solve anything for this man. There was just this need and desire to be alive, which he, more or less said during the Talking Pillows scene he never had done in his entire 50 years of existence in this world. So again, that's just my humble opinion. You can take it and throw it in the trash if you will, but that's just sort of how I sort of read Walter White's character at this point in time in the story. At Green Lizard Balls. Yeah, like I said, I've thought about this show once or twice. If you're talking about that, I appreciate the kind words there. I've thought about this show for sure. But anyway, the next morning here, following the party, we see the fallout of this, where Walt and Skylar are not talking with one another. We see Walter Jr. sort of shun his father here a little bit, where he decides to take the bus instead of going to work with his father as he normally does. We sort of see the tension here. You can cut the tension with a knife here in this scene, quite the prelude for what is to come. We then jump to a continuation of Jesse Pinkman's storyline with Badger, where we see, like I talked about a little bit earlier, Jesse deciding to take up Brandon on his offer because he's, again, in my opinion, maybe a little bit biased, he doesn't want to work this undignified profession where he spins a sign for a living. And of course, while Badger, needs to work a job, needs to have gainful employment for his probation, at the same time, he wants to make some mad dough, as he says, and has quite the pseudo hookup for Jesse. But yeah, this sort of preface scene here prior to the sort of meth cook montage, it is kind of cool here. We get to see that, like I said, This is coming much more naturally to Jesse Pinkman because it's quite a great scene here where he's telling Brandon Badger about all this equipment and he knows it by name, and he knows much more about the cook process. And of course, he's learned all of this through his teaming up with Walter White. Badger being very taken aback by this, saying, "You really know your S." But yeah, it's sort of a great really sort of continues on what I talked about a little bit earlier in respect to Jesse Pinkman's thought process here. And yeah, so following this, we finally get to see this sort of meth cook montage scene. And my God, what a great sort of scene here. And one of my favorite montage scenes of Breaking Bad, the sort of cooking scene that's happening here. And of course, the grand irony here is that this is, I believe, is the second meth cook montage scene that we saw this season. The first one we saw, of course, took place in the pilot where Walt and Jesse are cooking. And of course, the grand irony here is that now the roles are sort of effectively flipped where Jesse is sort of the more straight man, Walter White serious character here in this montage scene, and Brandon is more of the what Jesse Pinkman was like back in the pilot, where he's sort of goofing off, not really taking the cook very seriously, being sort of a classic Brandon in this scene. A lot of cool callbacks, like when Brandon puts his face right by the red phosphorus. Definitely a callback to the phosphine gas scene that happened in season 1 in the pilot episode. Just, yeah, so in the grand scheme of things, like I talked about, the sort of roles are sort of switched here. That's sort of the main premise of this sort of meth cook montage scene here. Let me sort of, again, there's so much here. Yeah, J Ladybug, great quotes there for sure. Add Sam Fisher, that is funny, man. That is funny. Well, yeah, it's kind of true. Where compared to Jesse, no, compared to Badger, Jesse almost seems like Antoine Lavoisier, right? To quote Walter White from I believe it was that I think that was Say My Name when he first teamed up with Todd. So yeah, that is quite the comparison for sure. I almost don't feel like even pointing this out, but a pretty hilarious scene when we get a very brief shot of the magazine that Badger is reading, and just kind of funny his apparent preference when it comes to women. I found that actually quite funny. Maybe I don't have to point it out specifically, but if you go back and rewatch the scene, it was kind of interesting. Sort of Brandon's preferences, if you will. But yeah, of course, following again this scene again the meth cook montage scene that will of course foreshadow where it goes following it continuing after the scenes of back to the A story with Walt and his family. But yeah, again, great scene here with Walt Jr. and his friends trying to buy a 6-pack of beer. And actually, kind of an interesting side note here. I think I'm almost positive if you look at the credits here in this scene. If I can try to find the character here. But yeah, this kid with the long white hair, on the credits, his name is Lewis. But of course, as we know from, when we first see Lewis drive Walter Jr. to school, I believe it was in the next season, in season 2 of Breaking Bad. The episode is escaping me. I think it might have been... if I can try to find it here. I think it might have been Down, if I'm not mistaken, after Bit by Dead Bee. But the character was definitely sort of recast as a different character. Because it says that this character was originally intentionally supposed to be Lewis. No, that's Stone Yoda. That is too funny right there. But at the end of the day, I think technically it is a recast. I don't really sort of care about that. But again, the characters are completely different and completely rewritten from season to season. So, and the way I sort of chalk it up is that Walter Jr. has 2 friends named Lewis. That's sort of the way that I sort of rationalize all of this, if you will, at Stone Yoda. Where I think technically the recast was supposed to be 2 completely different characters at Jeff Effect, right? Yeah, not as consequential as Jeff, but we never get a last name, so I want to believe that Walter Jr. has 2 friends named Lewis, and after this, Lewis totally bailed on him here and totally left him out to dry when he ran when the cops sort of arrested or detained Walter Jr. Maybe he started hanging out with the other Lewis, if you know, so... So yeah. Add Justin Cruz. I'm almost positive that this the kid with the long white ponytail and the hat. This was originally supposed to be Lewis, but he was rewritten into the sort of more mild mannered, almost kind of a sort of Eddie Haskell, if you will, the sort of character that came across in the next season of season 2 of Breaking Bad. But again, Lewis recast aside here. Again, quite this scene here where Walt decides to call Hank instead of his father. And, Hank even pointing out, not cool, man. Me calling me instead of your father. How do you think that's going to make him feel? And again, pride being a sort of real theme that occurs over the course of this episode and beyond. This really sort of reminded me back to season 2 of Breaking Bad in the episode entitled Down, where following Walt getting that positive cancer diagnosis and him being very sort of angry and also drunk at the same time with the Walt's relationship with Hank compared to his own, like, why are you looking at him, not me? So a little bit of foreshadowing there in respect to the sort of pride and the sort of, the damage to Walter White's pride and ego that he probably would experience if he ever learned that Walter Jr. called Hank instead of Walt. And it's true, as he says in the very next scene, I don't think he actually, he says don't tell, Walt about the kid, and probably because he didn't want it to damage his pride and ego, and, him just saying growing pains, kid just trying to score some beer. But, yeah, great scene here where then a lot of sort of comedy interjected where, Hank basically chalking up Walter White acting out to growing pains, this plus the weed. Of course, Skyler saying that I wasn't talking about Walt. I wasn't talking about Walter Jr. I was talking about Walt. The sort of humor that ensues here where Hank is sort of, can't even comprehend the sort of the brother-in-law that he's known his entire life, using this product. And again, I've talked about this in the past. I'm going to try not to piss off the algorithm too much here, but this product was definitely much more taboo and much more less socially acceptable. And I feel like there's a more of an insinuation and association with it back in 2008, much more compared to 2022, where I feel like it's legal in so many states. It's really it's not a big deal anymore. I mean, in some places it's still super illegal, but the sort of social stigma of this product is nowhere near what it was in 2008. So I really feel like Hank's reaction at the time this was written was much more pertinence. I keep reusing that word, but I feel like that sort of, it definitely made sense. And not to mention the fact that he is a DEA agent. And, I don't know how people who work at the DEA still feel about it, but it is still a Schedule 1 controlled substance up there with a lot of other terrible things. So, yeah, cool. Good to know, Justin Cruz. But yeah, definitely much less stigmatized now than 14 years ago. But yeah, of course, this scene here, we then, see Skyler saying, who in their right mind would not accept treatment, especially when it's completely paid for. Essentially here saying we need to sort of, have a family meeting with him. Marie thinking, what an intervention. So, basically sort of setting up the sort of intervention here where Skyler can truly not rack her mind on why, like, Walter White is, at least from my perspective, you are essentially deciding to give up and die, basically, because while the chemotherapy doesn't offer you much hope, statistically speaking, it still gives you a fragment of hope. But if you do not take this chemotherapy, the cancer will continue to spread and it will eventually kill you. It's really hard to treat cancer. This is really the only sort of opportunity, or sort of the only real choice we have at this point in time. I mean, cancer technology is, better than it was in 08, but it's not much better. But, proportionally so, it's pretty bad in 2008. But anyway, she's wondering why he's basically deciding to lie down and die here. And, this, of course, prefacing and foreshadowing the infamous talking pillow scene that will happen following the story cutting back to Jesse and Badger here in the RV in the out in the boonies of New Mexico. At Lukester, yeah, I've been recommended that show for sure. I'm not the biggest sort of sci-fi fan, if you will. I don't mind watching it in like cartoons and stuff, but yeah, I don't know if I'm the biggest. I don't watch a lot of sort of I guess live action, is that the right word? Like, really regular television shows, but I've heard a lot of good things about the X-Files. I've never seen it though, so. At Stoned Yoda, that is a great point right there for sure. I'm again really reading my mind here on where I'm going to go here in the scene. But anyway, yeah. So following this, we see Jesse and Badger. They made this successful pound of weed of methamphetamine. Badger seems very excited about it, saying, "We're going to make some serious dough. I'm going to burn that dollar bill suit. You're a genius." But of course, very sort of, you know, before I get to that, at Sam Fisher, thank you so much for the super chat. "I have the talking pillow now" is better than "I am the one who knocks." Oh my god, that is too funny, man. That is too funny right there. Because, yeah, thank you so much for the super chat at Sam Fisher. I really appreciate it. But yeah, that is funny there, because the "I am the one who knocks" sort of speech, that became sort of a cultural phenomenon. I heard people talk about that on the radio and stuff like that had nothing to do with Breaking Bad. But yeah, the "I have the talking pillow" that really didn't catch on as much. So I see what you did there, man. That is hilarious at Sam Fisher. So really appreciate the super chat. But yeah, the talking pillow scene didn't really catch on. And yeah, it's kind of funny. I remember when I first watched this sort of talking pillow scene, I feel like I definitely don't appreciate it as much as I do now. I just, after watching it again, unbelievable scene there, absolutely. And I think even Betsy Brandt herself, I was reading about it, said that I think that was one of her favorite scenes to shoot in all Breaking Bad at Sam Fisher, because she says it had everything. It had humor, it had drama, it was intense. So yeah, great scene for sure that we will get to. But yeah, at the Recovery 716. I feel like I felt that initially a little bit. I wouldn't say cringe. I feel like it was a little bit awkward in many respects, but I definitely don't feel that way anymore. I definitely maybe did when I first watched it, maybe even the first 2 or 3 or 4 watches, but as I sort of was rewatching this, in its entirety, and after having the entire Breaking Bad story to look back on, I definitely don't feel that way. I think by definition it's a little bit awkward, but I think that's sort of the intention of the scene. But yeah, I will get to that for sure. And at Lukester Drive, yeah, I think Drive, wasn't that the episode that Bryan Cranston was in of the yeah, you even said it there. That was the sort of role by which Vince Gilligan wanted to cast him for Breaking Bad. I've absolutely heard that. Where he has kind of the long hair, he's in the back of the car. I've definitely seen part of that scene on YouTube, that's for sure. Maybe I'll have to check out that episode. I don't know if I'll watch the entire show, but I definitely should probably check out that episode at least. But yeah, great scene here with Badger and Jesse. And again, long story long, Badger's excited. He's going to burn that dollar bill suit. They're going to make some serious dough. But of course, Jesse's saying, it's not the same. It's last time it was glass, this time it's cloudy. It's not glass. And of course, Badger's saying, cloudy, looks good enough to me. And, Jesse's saying, of course, good enough. And of course, then walking out and throwing it on the ground, much to Badger's dismay. Just being like, "I absolutely would have smoked that or even sold that. What are you doing?" And of course, Jesse's saying it's not for us, it's for our customers. They expect a certain standard. We're going to do it again until we get it right. Badger's saying, what are you even talking about? Just absolutely flabbergasted and perplexed by what Jesse Pinkman did here. And in the grand scheme of things, again, I talked about this a little bit earlier when I talked about the very first cold opening scene here. Jesse did Brandon really dirty in this episode. He really did. Badger is one heck of a friend, and he is definitely someone that you would want in your corner, where it's pretty crazy to think that after Jesse really screws Badger here. He even says it to him. In the next scene, we see him throw out another batch of meth because it doesn't meet the sort of standards that he had with Walter White. And as Badger even said to him, do you know how long I had to spin that sign? 3 entire pounds of pseudo wasted. You basically, I spent all this money for us. We're getting nothing in return for it. And then you're going to throw red phosphorus in my eyes after I helicopter you and break all your equipment. And then you're going to leave me in the middle of the desert to walk back. And who knows how he even got back? Who knows where the hell he is here? Maybe being dehydrated and just, disorientated and not knowing where he is. But despite all of this, in the very next season when Jesse needs help cleaning out his basements, in the episode entitled Bit by Dead Bee After the Death of Tuco, his man Badger helps him out. So my God, Badger did not hold a grudge here. Badger is one heck of a friend. And it's pretty crazy. I'll talk about this a little bit later, I guess after the Talking Pillow scene. But actually, yeah, we'll talk about this before the Talking Pillow scene. But yeah, Jesse did Badger really dirty here in this scene. And I'll talk a little bit about his thought process in the as it comes up right before the preface of the Talking Pillow scene. At Charlie Hennings, yeah, that is an interesting perspective right there. I'll get to that for sure. But of course, after the scene where he throws out the first batch of meth, in the next scene, we see the preface of the talking pillow scene where Walt comes home from supposedly work and he sees himself, um, being set up here for this intervention. He says to, Skylar says to him to take a seat. Pretty funny scene here with Hank unwrapping the food. I've definitely sort of seen the sort of scene on YouTube where like Walter Jr. is laughing here in this scene. And again, I'm not sure if this is sort of a intentional laugh by the character or if it's actually like a sort of breaking character blooper that was left in here in the scene. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but Walter Jr. is definitely laughing here in this scene. And I always wondered if this was an accident or if it was written into the character where he's laughing at his uncle for, probably being really hungry and being told that he couldn't eat until Walt came, or if it was actually just, the actor R.J. Mitty laughing at the sort of the mannerisms and actions of Dean Norris here in the scene. I've always wondered. I'm not 100% sure if this was confirmed to be an accident or if it was written into the scene for Walt Jr. to laugh here. At Sam Fisher, thank you so much for the super chat, man. Really appreciate the support. Jesse pulled the Bagman on Badger. I don't know how Badger survived that crossbow. I don't know how Badger survived. That crossbow really helped. Yeah, that's true. I see what you're saying there with the Bagman. I mean, I don't know how in the world that he got back to a civilization. We don't know how far out in the boonies he is, but likely hadn't slept in a couple of days. It took them at least a while to cook that. I mean, I don't know how many days, but at least took at least a day, if not more, to cook that batch of meth. Probably very dehydrated, really living off of nothing but 40-ounce malt liquor and potato chips. So he did him really dirty, that's for sure. I don't know how Badger survived. Yeah, me too for sure. It's definitely sort of implied that he somehow got back to civilization and, at the same time didn't hold a grudge. And that crossbow really helped. I hope you're being, I guess that's sort of irony there for sure at Sam Fisher because I guess, he said maybe we'll see javelinas. I think it's like a type of feral pig or wild pig or something like that. But yeah, the crossbow really didn't do much in hindsight. So, classic Badger bringing the crossbow when it really didn't help. Probably should have brought some water or a map or something to that effect. I'm not sure about the sort of GPS technology back in 2008. But yeah, really appreciate the super chat there for sure. But yeah, that's a great question. We have no idea how far away from civilization Badger was when he was left out there in the middle of the desert. But that is a great question for sure, man. So I don't know how he survived, but he did survive. That's so true at Sony. I was thinking that could be a whole spinoff there. Badger getting back home. That could be an entire spinoff. But yeah, at the same time, as Lalo sort of said to Saul in the episode entitled Bad Choice Road, it's not that far back to the main road. He didn't hitchhike, and of course, Badger doesn't have $5 million in cash with him, so I guess he could. And there weren't cartel or not, I guess gang members Colombian gang members looking for him. So yeah, I guess he probably could have hitchhiked in hindsight at J Ladybug. That makes a lot of sense there. But yeah, so we see the preface here. Again, I'm not sure if this was an intentional blooper here by RJ Mitty. But yeah. Yeah, the hitchhike with the crossbow. I guess he would probably have to ditch the crossbow. I don't know if anyone's picking up a sort of, a strange, sort of disheveled, very, dirty clothes individual holding a crossbow. That is quite the adventure there for sure. He maybe would have had to ditch the crossbow. But yeah. Quite a great scene here where, like I said, Jesse does Badger really dirty here. And, in hindsight, I mean, I know, I think was it Charlie, if I can find it, I think, was it Charlie Hennings who said that, Jesse wanted Walt's approval here with this cook? I don't know about that. I mean, I just feel like, it's weird. I mean, maybe Jesse really thought that, the sort of one cook was enough for him to recreate this batch of meth and make it the exact same as Walter White's. At a certain point, we know that he'll basically be able to cook the meth, indistinguishably different than like 96 percent compared to 99% of Walter White, but obviously with only one cook under his belt, he's unable to do so. And yeah, quite the, I don't know if he sort of gave Badger the sort of full lowdown here, where he almost used his 3 pounds of methamphetamine to practice with to become a better meth cook here, and really sort of left Badger hang out to dry here. And it's so true. He could have absolutely gave him the product anyway. They had probably at least, 2 pounds of product with them here that they could have sold. And yes, while it's not the sort of, infamous 99% product that he sold to Combo and that, all those guys would give a certain body part to try again, at the same time, as, Jesse says in the episode entitled Fly, we're creating, a product for people who don't really care. And when push comes to shove, people like Spooge and his lady are gonna, happily take this product if given the opportunity. And Badger would have absolutely smoked this, and absolutely like he would have sold it as well. And really sort of did him dirty by just throwing out the sort of the product here, where it really didn't even. Again, it wasn't really about the sort of money. Money sort of being the theme that Justin Cruz was talking about with Walt and money and Jesse with money. It was more about the sort of pride and the desire to be the best at something. It was more just about the sort of hunt and the journey for characters like Jesse and Walt in this scene, and the sort of collateral damage was a Badger here, absolutely. And yeah, Spooge would have absolutely happily taken that product, that is for sure, at Stone Yoda. And yeah, really did Badger dirty here. But like I talked about, he is quite the friend if after all of this, he was still willing to help out his friend Jesse Pinkman and let bygones be bygones in the next season in the episode entitled Bit by Dead Bee. Quite the friend for sure. But yeah, Jesse really sort of, used his friend here and really sort of, I would almost say take advantage of him a little bit, maybe as a result of his ego or his own narcissism that I talked about a little bit earlier in the stream. But yeah, just, really did Badger dirty. I mean, at the same time, it's kind of, meth cooks sort of turning on each other. I'm going to go on a limb and say it's been known to happen. But yeah, it's quite the scene here for sure, where Jesse ends up leaving Badger here stranded in the desert. And then, following this, we don't see Badger again until he helps Jesse out in the next season. So yeah, quite the just unbelievable scene here with Jesse trying to move on with his life, with this sort of meth cook scene here that happens in this episode, with him learning the difficulties of doing it, with him sort of really being, taken down a peg or two, with him realizing that, it really, as he was sort of saying, I had this partner, but I was doing most of the work. He was just, messing up and driving us into a ditch. But in reality, really getting sort of cut down a peg here, where him realizing it wasn't really him, and this was Walter White's product. And, he again, maybe he was sort of lying to himself, or again, naive, or if you will, but Jesse really sort of learning here that, he sort of needs Walt if he ever wants to go about creating this product ever again, and without him, it will just never be the same. So, quite the sort of foreshadowing for the final sort of meeting that happens between these two characters at the end of this episode. But yeah, I really feel like I said, this episode here really sort of exemplifies the story of Jesse Pinkman that I talked about a little bit earlier in the stream, in respect to all the character flaws that I feel that Jesse Pinkman has. Again, I don't want to repeat myself for like the 50th time, but I feel like, just the ego and the narcissism and the sort of self-aggrandizement and the entitlement a little bit with Jesse Pinkman was kind of on full display here in this episode that I talked about a little bit earlier, and was really exemplified in this scene as well, just his actions with his friend Badger here. So, just my humble opinion, and that sort of, sums up the story of Jesse Pinkman here in this episode, until, of course, we see them, him cross paths with Walt in the very last scene. So, of course, yeah, following this, we now get to the infamous, notorious Talking Pillow scene. Ooh, and again, I don't want to, this is actually quite a long scene here. I mean, I'm trying to even calculate it here, like 18, I'm trying to, 4, 5, 6. This is quite a long scene. I mean, this scene is over, about 10 minutes long here. This is a really long scene here. So it is, it's quite the watch here for sure. And we see this sort of intervention, and again, I don't want to get bogged down in every single little specific detail here, but I'll try to just summarize the sort of main gist of the scene, and then sort of cap it off on how Walter White takes all of this in. At Pulsura, right on time, man. There she is, leading the charge when it comes to what she thinks is right, until someone disagrees. Of course, Skylar White, ladies and you have made your point absolutely clear, Pulsar. I was waiting. I was wondering. Right on time, man. I was wondering if you were going to say something about this scene for sure. But yeah, absolutely. But yeah. So in summary, here, this is essentially an intervention where Skylar's basically saying, "I don't understand your thought process," and I talked about this a little bit earlier, where she's basically saying, you have to do the chemo because there's really no other choice here. This is Skylar's logic. The cancer will kill you. Yes, the chemo. It's a fragment of hope, but it's still a fragment. It's still possible. This doesn't only affect you. Don't you want to see your children grow up? Why are you essentially lying down and dying? It's clear that your pride is not letting you accept this help from Gretchen and Elliot. I understand that. Maybe it was the way you were raised, something akin to that. But that is true. At Justin Cruz, we have to remember she is pregnant, and I mean, pregnant women, hormones are absolutely a thing. So I am not on team anti Skylar. I'm pretty neutral on Skylar. I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but yes, we do have to remember she was very pregnant here, for sure. But yeah, so that's sort of Skylar's opinion. We then see sort of Hank talking here, and Mike, this was pretty fun. I mean, Hank's sort of it's just the sort of not the best at articulating his emotions, if you will. Kind of a sort of stereotypical man who is not, I would say, the best at conveying their emotions. Pretty funny analogies here with the baseball analogy, and the baseball analogy here, which is absolutely hilarious. Where he's again, I'm not even going to try to explain it because I don't even know if Hank is if even Hank sort of knows where he's going with this analogy. But it's pretty hilarious here where he basically says, yeah, I understand you have your pride, but if Daddy Warbucks wants you to help, just, take the money. That's essentially what Hank says here. Walter Jr. is saying, basically saying what Skylar's saying. It seems to me as though you're just giving up and willing to die. I deal with a lot of, terrible things in my life. I have a, disability, I deal with terrible things every day, you're afraid of a little bit of chemotherapy. Just imagine that everything I have to do, kind of echoing sort of Skylar's opinion, where saying, it seems as though you're just giving up and dying. Hank saying, I understand you have your pride. Skylar saying that as well. And of course, we then get to Marie Schrader here in this scene, and Marie's opinion in respect to what Walter White should do here. Yeah, that's Stone. I can't do that justice, Stone Yoda. I can't do the scene justice. You have to just go back and watch it. It's absolutely hilarious. Sort of Hank's attempted analogy here in the scene. But yeah, try again. So yeah, but of course, Marie sort of takes this sort of alternate approach here, where and it's what sort of Walt agrees with initially, where, basically I think Walt should do whatever he wants to do. Because, as she said, she's a sort of x-ray technician, and she's seen, the fact that, as Walter White says later in the scene, where a lot of people who do this chemotherapy, they just, they pump their bodies full of this, poison in air quotes, but it essentially just incapacitates them, and they're just marking time, as Walt says. And, Marie says if he just wants to, live out his remaining years and not go through this horrible treatment, that's his decision. And if anyone knows the musician Warren Zevon, he kind of did the same thing, and very ironically was also diagnosed with lung cancer. I think mesothelioma, I think stage 4 lung cancer. And when given this diagnosis, he opted not to go through with the chemotherapy treatment and just decided to, live his remaining year or so. I think he was only given a couple months to live, but I think he lived maybe 9 months to a year after his diagnosis. And, he worked on his project, his final album, The Wind. And that was sort of his decision, as he, I believe he even said he didn't go through with chemotherapy because he was fearful that it would incapacitate him. But of course, the sort of alternate of that is the fact that, you're essentially sort of, it will kill you. The cancer will kill you. If you have stage 4 cancer and you don't get chemotherapy, the cancer will kill you in a short period of time. The only hope is chemotherapy. But there are absolute consequences to this. And, Skylar's just absolutely taken aback. But this is the sort of argument that Skylar is having with Marie here, sort of, to be sort of, to streamline and be a little bit blunt about it. But yeah, Walt then goes about and just kind of reiterates all the things I sort of used in that Warren Zevon analogy where, what's the point in me continuing to be alive, marking time if, I'm just basically, a shell of myself. I'm just, so sick I have to lie in bed. I'm suffering from, essentially implying, he's going to be suffering from like things like incontinence and vomiting, and Skylar's going to have to clean up after him and take care of him. His hair is going to fall out. He's going to be so nauseous that he's not going to be able to move his head. Why am I going to do this when statistically speaking, I'm going to die anyway? I mean, it's pretty sobering, and it's one of the most horrible. I mean, cancer is just absolutely a terrible, horrible disease. But, Walt's saying, like, odds are, even if I go through with this treatment, it's still going to kill me in a very short period of time. I would rather just be, as healthy as I can be, until the cancer effectively kills me. And I don't know if anyone has seen Warren Zevon on Letterman, but after he got diagnosed with this cancer, I think even Letterman asked him, like, how are you feeling? And he said, I don't feel as bad as they tell me that I am. So again, I don't know what it's like to have, stage 3A, stage 4 cancer, but it is kind of, quite the dichotomy where you're dying, but in the short, interval of time following the diagnosis, you're still, you don't feel, to quote Warren Zevon, you don't feel as bad as they say that you are. So just kind of an interesting dichotomy here where Walt kind of says all of this where I'm not going to go through a treatment. I've never had really any say in my life. And the only choice, the only sort of, choice that I have left to make is how do I deal with this situation that has been dealt to me. How I sort of go on following this cancer diagnosis is the only decision I have left in my life. And basically sort of laying out everything I just said about how he doesn't want to be just incapacitated and take all of this sort of chemotherapy just to mark time, and and just so Skylar can clean up after him, and and again, it's quite a sobering thing too, where he even says, and and that's how you'll remember me. You'll remember me as this sort of shell of myself, this sort of degenerating, decomposing human being who's dying right in front of your faces. That is it's true about human memory. It seems to be that the last thing that we see is what is most strikingly vivid in our memory. And Walter White even says that to Walter Jr. about his own father, who died of Huntington's disease, which is this horrible degenerative brain disease, if I'm not mistaken. And he says to him that, and I believe it was in season 4 of Breaking Bad, in the episode entitled Salute, that very sort of sobering piece of dialogue where people tell me just how great my father was. They tell me all these anecdotes and stories about how wonderful he is. But of course, he died when Walter White was very young. And he says that the only memory he has of him is him in that hospital bed dying of Huntington's disease, just looking all just, haggard and degenerating and decomposing. That is the only memory he has of his father. And of course, he says to Walter Jr., because when he came over and he sort of had this sort of emotional breakdown, following everything that happened with Jesse punching him and everything that was happening with Gus, how him having that emotional crying breakdown was not how he wanted to be remembered. And just a lot of very just dark, sobering details here in this scene with him not wanting to be remembered that way. Of course, very ironically, his son is going to remember him as a meth cooking drug king, meth cooking drug king, if you will, drug kingpin. So I guess, maybe that's more prideful for Walt than just dying of cancer right in front of his family. But in this moment here, he says, I'm not going through a treatment, no way. And that's sort of where he leaves it. And yeah, Justin Cruz for sure. But again, this is sort of another scene here I never sort of really was able to wrap my mind around. And was never really outwardly told to us, where Walt wakes up the next morning, he looks at all the cancer books and the Raising Your Child books that Skylar is reading. he sort of goes on her side of the bed, smells her like face cream, if you will, about something. Yeah, at Sam Fisher, he changed his mind so fast I never understood it. Yeah, me neither. It was never really displayed to us where, he smells Walter White's sort of face cream or hand cream or something, looks at the book she's reading, goes on her side of the bed, has this moment of introspection in the bed, and then goes to Skylar in the next scene and says, all right, I changed my mind. And, he says, I'm going to go through with the treatment. And again, to this day, I never understood, and it was never explained to us, of course, why Walter White decided to, change his mind like this on a dime, basically overnight. Yeah, Jay Ladybug, empathy potentially, and I was kind of racking my brain and thinking about it over the, when I was rewatching this episode, and I don't know, maybe he just didn't want to sort of lose his family here, and he wanted his, he still loved his family and understood that, Skylar and Walter Jr. wanted him to go through with the treatments, despite the fact of, Walter White's reservations about it, where even in the very next scene when he starts his chemotherapy, we see Walter Jr. smiling from ear to ear, very happy, likely that his father had been decided to go through with this treatment. And yeah, I think he did do it for Skylar. He knew that Skylar didn't want him to lose, him. And at the same time, like, yes, while, he has this sort of terminal diagnosis, I guess at the same time, there is this sort of fragment of hope that the sort of cancer can be mitigated or diminished, and he can be put into remission potentially. And, yeah, again, to this day, I mean, we still don't know why Walter White decided to do this. I mean, to chalk it up, I guess he did it for his family at the end of the day. And it is kind of funny, though. I was thinking about the fact that how, he talks about how chemotherapy is just, horribly debilitating. And of course, we do see over the course of, this season and the next when he's going through his chemotherapy treatment. Of course, over the course of Breaking Bad, when he's going through his chemotherapy treatment, the vomiting and just the incapacitation that he suffers from. I don't know if incapacitation is the right word, but just the vomiting and the sort of, physical ailments that he suffers from. It's pretty crazy to think that Walter White was doing all of this, he was cooking this methamphetamine, he was going out and trudging out to these sort of Indian reservations and cooking this meth, all while doing chemo, I mean, and dying of cancer. I mean, it is kind of, he comes across as a little bit of like a sort of, almost like a Superman sort of character where he's able to do all of this. I mean, speaking for myself, I mean, my goodness, if I had, who knows, I mean, the sort of pride and desire being the sort of, fuel of his fire to do all of this. But I feel like most people who are getting, chemotherapy done are just, you're just absolutely just wrecked and incapacitated and can't, hardly move, let alone drive an RV out into the wilderness and cook methamphetamine. And, yeah, absolutely at Sam Fisher, Walter White is just built different. Absolutely. I kind of think back to the sort of anecdote of, the woman lifting up the sort of car to save her child that's trapped underneath it or something like that, where seemingly it seems physically impossible, but, it is technically possible, even though, you're probably like, I think, what's sort of lost in that sort of, metaphor is that, yes, they are lifting the car, but at the same time, it's not like you have superhuman strength. You're just literally like rupturing every disc in your back, basically, to lift that car or something to that effect. But, yeah, don't quote me on that. I'm no scientist. But, yeah, to this day, I've never understood why Walter White decided to go through the treatment. I guess it was for his family. It's kind of, it is kind of interesting where the whole point of him cooking methamphetamine was to leave money for his family and was to provide for his family because he loved his family. And at the same time, if his family wanted him to go through with this treatment, I guess at the end of the day, what is the worst? What is the worst that can happen? All the horrible, terrible things I just talked about yesterday. But maybe like as Sam Fisher is saying, Walter White just built different. Maybe he thinks, I can help my family out here. I can leave them this money. I can also do this chemotherapy that can, give them peace and make them happy and give me, and at the same time, give me a small fighting chance of survival potentially. So that's sort of where I think Walter White's mind was at. Again, to this day, we don't know what was going on in his head, but that's sort of just my sort of watch and read of the scene after the 2 dozenth time that I've seen it so far. But yeah, that's just sort of my opinion on all of this. So. Yeah, at the Recovery 716, that is a great point. That is an unbelievable scene that took place in the episode entitled 4 Days Out. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but yeah, that is an unbelievable scene for sure. And sort of really sort of coming full circle with the story. Absolutely. So much nuance and metaphors there. But yeah, the next day we see them, or I don't know, later, maybe the same day, the next day, he starts this chemotherapy treatment. Again, I love this sort of sweater sort of metaphor here, where it's kind of true. If you go back and rewatch season one of Breaking Bad, anytime Walter White wears like this like beige gray sweater is when he's sort of like the like powerless and like really like not in control. It's kind of an interesting sort of motif that's displayed to us over the course of the show. Just kind of interesting food for thought, where we first see him wearing that sweater prior to him getting diagnosed with cancer. He's wearing a sweater, I believe, when he gets diagnosed with cancer. He's actually even wearing a sweater when Hank confronts him at JP Wynn in the very next episode when he goes through his chemistry sort of storage closet. But anyway, that's just an interesting side note. But of course, here, Skyler and Walter Jr. are much more happy with the situation. Skyler, of course, saying that because insurance isn't going to cover this, we can just pay for this on a credit card. And then, of course, Gretchen and Elliot can reimburse us. Walter White, of course, saying, yeah, the pink sweater as well. He was pretty powerless with the pink sweater, too. You know, his family had just left him in the finale, the ABQ finale of season 2 of Breaking Bad. Don't want to get ahead of myself there. The pink sort of analogy, too, is a huge point in all of this as well. Yeah, absolutely. At Stone Yoda, the sort of yellow, and he wears a lot of yellow and green over the course of season 1 when he's sort of in control. And the sort of yellow is the sort of pseudo courage, and the green is the sort of, envy, monetary color. And of course, the sort of beige color is, yeah, sort of bland, powerless, out of control. I've definitely noticed that sort of being displayed to us over the course of this, first season. At Richie MC, that is funny. That is funny right there. That made my day right there. That is freaking hilarious. Yeah, it is pretty crazy. If you go back and watch Breaking Bad, the colors were very, very intentional in this show. I absolutely love it. That is the discussion for a completely different video, but yeah, that is quite something there. But of course, like I said, they said they would just Elliot would reimburse them. Walter White said, "I will take care of it." Of course, we then see Walt going about his first round of chemotherapy here. And yeah, so again, like I said, I was thinking about, man, if God forbid this happens to me or anyone watching this, or anyone who you care about or love. I mean, cancer is just horrible, terrible, horrible. It's one of the worst things that can happen to you in human existence. But like I talked about, Walter White just being built differently. Where after this chemotherapy treatment, he while doing chemotherapy, he was trudging out to the desert and cooking meth with Jesse. Quite the sort of Superman here, if you will. But yeah, great scene here where right before he's about to drive to Jesse Pinkman, of course, at the time we don't exactly know what his intentions are, but he gets a call from Gretchen here where she says that Elliot told her about the cancer and that we should offer, basically offering to pay for it all, saying that money is just as good, is basically your money. And again, like I talked about earlier in the stream again and again, it's not about the money, it's about the pride and the needing to be fulfilled for Walter White. Of course, Gretchen at the same time saying, is this about us? Again, foreshadowing the conversation that's going to happen next season in the episode entitled Peekaboo, where we learn more of the backstory of Gretchen and Walter White. And of course, Walt rejects the overtures here, feigning cordialities. More seeds being planted in the story here. Lying to Gretchen, saying that, insurance covered all of it, so you don't have to pay for it, despite the fact that, you are basically saving me here. And, I'll talk a little bit about it in this final scene here with Jesse as well, but, Walt basically saying, thanks anyway, Gretchen saying keep in touch, rejecting the overtures, lying to Gretchen here, saying that, the insurance is covering the treatment, of course, at the same time lying to his family, saying that Gretchen and Elliot are covering the treatment. This is all going to sort of come up and, blow up in Walter White's face next season, especially following in the episode entitled Down, during the sort of celebration party, and his sort of reaction to Skyler giving thanks to Gretchen and Elliot, and the sort of, lack and the sort of the hindering of Walter White's own pride and ego that causes, not to mention, just yeah, basically that, and that's all going to come to blows, and eventually, that's going to lead to Skylar figuring out that he had been lying to her for the entire the entire first two seasons, and of course, while he was clearly lying here and there, the sort of big lie finally blowing up in his face. But yeah, of course, following this, we then see Walter White go to Jesse Pinkman. Jesse Pinkman, of course, really taken aback, but it's like, are you effing kidding me right now? After everything, after I proposition you and you tell me to basically go screw off, now you come here. He says, yo, like, what's up? What are you doing? Like, why are you here? You basically said you don't want to deal with me anymore. And of course, Walter White then says to him, want to cook. And thus ending this unbelievable episode here in season 1 of Breaking Bad. And so, yeah, like I talked about, Walter White's just pride and ego and the desire to just be in control of his life and to do something that gives him fulfillment and a reason for being is sort of the reason why he wants to continue to partner with Jesse Pinkman. And it's kind of interesting, it's like I even sort of wondered about the fact where, at the same time, I guess, he possibly could have, let Gretchen Elliott pay for his chemotherapy, but also cook this methamphetamine at the same time. I guess he could have done both technically. I don't know what was stopping him, but I guess, again, it was a sort of just absolute just pride and ego where Walter White just did not want to ask for help from anybody. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Anton Chigurh here, a little bit. If anyone's seen No Country for Old Men, the sort of main character doesn't want to ever ask for help from anyone and wants to be completely self-reliant all the time. And but of course everything ends up blowing up in his face when he ends up breaking his arm and realizing that he's essentially screwed and even he can't fix his own arm all by himself. But that's sort of another discussion for another day. But yeah, sort of the Wanna Cook sort of, bringing this story full circle where following these two characters going about their separate ways, their paths finally cross once again. And, after just sort of seeing the story that was presented to us about both these characters in this episode, they both say yes. Jesse needing, both these characters sort of needing this sort of, reason for being, desire to do something with their life. And yes, money is a part of it. As Sam Fisher, he never cared about the money in season 5. Their pile of money, he said, he never cared about the money in season 5. There is a pile of money. He doesn't even realize how much he was making. Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about the money. It's not a bad thing. It's definitely a sort of, nice part of all of this, but it's never about that. It was never about making money. It was about, like I said, I feel like I don't want to repeat myself too much. It's about, as he said to Jesse Pinkman and El Camino, doing something great, doing something that, gets you up in the morning and that you value and fills you, yeah, absolutely. Walt did it for the thrill. Yeah, that's a huge part of it. I did it for me. I was good at it. I was alive. And, Jesse Pinkman as well. I mean, both of their sort of pride and ego were on full display here in this episode. We're intertwined and juxtaposed in between one another over the course of this unbelievable episode. And that's sort of the main theme of this episode. Just, pride and ego and just, human desire and just, this desire to be, have just pride in having pride in what one is doing with their life, basically. That's sort of the way I see all of this. And, all of the sort of character traits that I ascribed to Jesse Pinkman, the sort of ego, the narcissism, the selfishness, maybe even a little bit of entitlement. I feel like Walter White's not as much entitled to as Jesse Pinkman sort of came across when he wanted that sort of job, where he basically just wanted that job despite him not having any of the credentials. I feel like maybe Walter White feels like he deserves these things, but I don't feel like if he's as entitled as Jesse. He's willing to sort of put in the work in sort of this sort of regard. I don't know, maybe he is a little bit entitled too, sort of. He feels like he's entitled to now sort of do the things that he's going to do in his life following his cancer diagnosis, and the fact that also he never really had any say in his life. Again, lots of food for thought. I feel like I could sit here and speculate for hours and hours and hours, but yeah, just an unbelievable episode that really gets you thinking. And, my perspective on it has absolutely changed, the second, third, fourth go around and all of this, more like 20th go around. But, yeah, just an unbelievable episode here for sure that, I can't, my superlatives would run out for if I continued to praise it. And yeah, like I said, season one, absolutely underrated season. One of my favorites for sure. Might be my favorite season of all Breaking Bad, but yeah, great episode here. And following this, we'll now get into the next story, next part of the story with Tuco Salamanca. But and I was actually also thinking about this as well. I thought about this. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but both of these characters could have cut their losses and abandoned ship here. They absolutely could have just said, we are never doing this ever again. Jesse Pinkman could, work a sort of menial job that, maybe didn't give him that much satisfaction. Walter White could have taken Gretchen and Elliot's offer, and they could have cut their losses. And it's pretty crazy, too. The two people that they sort of already killed, Emilio and Crazy Eight, there likely wouldn't have been these sort of broad-reaching intended consequences like there were following them killing Tuco, because despite the fact that they thought, okay, now Tuco's dead, we wash our hands of all of this, we then learn in season 3 of Breaking Bad in the season 3 premiere that Tuco's cousins are coming to avenge his death, and there's even things that are outside of Walter White's control, as we saw in the episode entitled Caballo Sin Nombre, when the cousins were gonna take revenge out on Walter White, and essentially this was totally out of his control, and Gus had to save him. But yeah, they both could have absolutely cut their losses here and probably just lived, gone on their very merry way and lived happily ever after, essentially, and not done all of these things. And they probably could have gotten away with it scot-free, more or less, in air quotes, and said, we did a lot of, crazy messed up things. We killed two people, essentially. We, made this meth. We made a little bit of money. We are in way over our heads. Let's cut our losses. Let's move on. But, maybe Jesse said, all right, I give up after trying this with Badger. But again, Walter White is just too tempting. He is the siren song for everyone, for Jesse, for Saul, for Gus Fring. This sort of unique skill set that Walter White has is just too tempting. And, these characters just being, in certain circumstances in their life, Jesse, Gus, and Saul, respectively, they all use Walter White, for their own sort of intended benefit and desire. And that's sort of the story of Breaking Bad, if you will. But yeah, just unbelievable episode here for sure. Just pretty crazy to know that, it's like you're almost telling him, get out while you still can. You can get out, while you still can. But truly, when they meet with Tuco, that is truly the point of no return. When Walter White decides to go into business with Tuco, that unbeknownst to them, that is truly crossing into the sort of the line of the cartel, where they are really in the game here, and they more than they can even know. And yeah, the way the story progresses in the next episode is just absolutely unbelievable. And my goodness, I love this first season. I absolutely I cannot sort of wait to discuss the rest of this first season here. Such an unbelievable show. I absolutely love this show, and I think it's pretty damn clear. at how you doing? That's pretty funny. I guess, yeah, that'd be one of the benefits, I suppose, of a sort of great amount of memory loss. I guess you could rewatch Breaking Bad, I suppose. So that's pretty funny. Thoughts on Ken? I mean, yeah, I feel like I talked about that a little bit more in the previous stream at Mendoza's Coyote. So I mean, I don't want to repeat myself too much. I definitely recommend going back and rewatching the previous stream for the episode entitled Cancer Man. So I talk a little bit more about Ken in that episode. Anton, who's your favorite Breaking Bad character? I mean, honestly, it would probably be Walter White. It would probably be Walter White. I think it's pretty obvious. I would say Walt. I say he's just the most, sort of unique, complex, compelling, just thought-provoking, really sort of character that, one that's ever been written. Yeah, Mike's a good, again, I feel like, it's a loaded question. I feel like there's no right answer, but if I had to choose one, I think Walt is a pretty, sort of safe answer, and it's probably the correct answer, but I'm leaving out, I mean, my goodness gracious, I mean, the complexity of characters like Mike and Gus, I mean, why Vince Gilligan wants to just walk away from this universe, I'll never know. But I guess he wants to pursue other things, and who knows? Maybe he'll make a show even better than this. He's set quite the standard for himself. But we will see when all is said and done in respect to what happens with this universe. So I feel like it's going to be done for a while, but it's we will see. So yeah, that's Sam Fisher at the Recovery 716. Mike is pretty great. Mike is a real great character too. Absolutely. So At Stone Yoda, I would say so. I think again, I would say so too. My sort of just gravitation to the character Walter White is which really made me watch the show. The sort of way his character was written, I absolutely agree at Stone Yoda. So yeah, I definitely understand that completely, and I love the sort of all the sort of metaphors and the thematic sort of backstory. I don't know, thematic back. Not thematic back. I guess thematic backstory. I just love the character. The character is just absolutely unbelievable. This sort of this man who really felt like he was dealt a raw deal in this life, and you know again, I feel like I could go on and on and on about it, but yeah, it's just, and I feel like I have, but yeah, Walter White for me, I would say. X.A. Abood, Jesse, I don't know. I don't know about that. As you probably know, my opinions on Jesse Pinkman, nah, I'm not the biggest fan. But no, for no fault of his own. But again, I sort of I got on Jesse enough in this episode for sure. But yeah, really sort of like I said, this sort of entire story that was presented here in Jesse, I think, about Jesse here in this episode, I feel like a lot of aspects of the story are a little bit overlooked. So yeah, Justin Cruz, in many respects, I think it may be season one, if we're being honest. I think it might be season one for sure. Uh, Again, loaded question, but I think season one might be my favorite season. It definitely may be. So, ooh, but with that, I think I'm gonna have to end the stream there. It is now officially Thursday here on the East Coast. But yeah, I really appreciate everyone for tuning in tonight. Really appreciate the chat and all the super chats. I really appreciate the support. I really love the perspective in the chat as well. I love hearing other people's perspective about this show. I feel like like I said, I feel like I could talk about this show forever and ever and ever. It never gets old. But yeah, so like I said, I will. Again, these streams will come periodically when I'm able to do so. It's I really enjoy doing it. Again, there's not a real sort of standard format by it. I mean, I feel like maybe Wednesdays is a good day for me. I don't know what sort of day works for everyone else, but likely Wednesdays are going to be days I'm going to be doing this, but we'll see in the future. Like I said, not so sure what is in store for the this channel in the grand scheme of things, but I'm more living sort of day to day here. So living in the moment, in the now. So, but anyway, like I said, gonna end the stream here. Really appreciate everyone in for tuning in tonight, and I will see you guys when I see you. Thank you so much. Have a great Thursday if you're on the East Coast. Have a great rest of your Wednesday if you're on anywhere else in the United States, and I will see you guys around. Take it easy, guys.